All right, Dan. Uh, Another morning podcast here. Get this one recorded. It's a great conversation as always. But yeah, today, we really dove into gear and our systems and clothing. But there's just so many tidbits and tips that are intermixed in that conversation. So made for a good one.
Yeah, gear is so dynamic and even we've been doing this a long time, but we're always looking to upgrade our systems from the big things, of course, to the little things. But there's never a bad time to upgrade your system and upgrade your kit. But now's the best time, in my opinion. Seeing deals, look on eBay, Facebook Marketplace. People are dumping off gear that maybe they didn't use in the past, and so these are the type of the things that we talked about in this podcast, and that I get fired up about because they call me Digi Deals for a reason. I love a good deal.
You do. We did a good job today at talking how you can save some money, how you can find deals, how you can get a system and not break the bank, and also talking about the top name brands as well. So yeah, I thought we did a good job of making our way through that to give some guys some tips so they can save that money for hunting season. I told a story about one year where I spent way too much and then didn't have the gas money for my truck. So I think that's important as well.
For sure. For sure. We answered some good questions. Thanks to everybody on social media that submitted some questions. There was some good stuff on there and some stuff that we don't normally think about. So that was fun for us to answer those and check out all the stuff that we do here at Eastman's. There's so much going on here. We have so many different videos and podcasts and our magazine, of course, the mule deer course, that's online, that is still available. It's always available, a matter of fact. Check out the Elk Collective too. We're working closely with them to update the course and improve it, and always just make our products better and better and more updated. So that's kind of our mission that we have here. What else are we forgetting, Brian? There's got to be something.
Oh, I don't think you forgot anything, but yeah, that mule deer course, you can put in the promo code Brian MDC, save a little bit of money there. TagHub is we're in application season now, so to learn about these states and these units and where to apply, it's a great resource, especially for the money. So you can check that out. Yeah, and then just super excited, about the mule deer course that's set up in a video format. And man, I just think you can cut your learning curve and be a better mule deer hunter sooner, learn how to hunt these different habitats. So much good information there. And then really stoked about the Elk Collective. I've got a couple videos on there on the Elk Collective, but I've been working my way through the course, and man, there's just a ton of great tips and tactics in there, and really able to take a page out of these other quality hunters' books and apply it to my own hunting. So pumped to be producing some more content for that. So yeah, I've got a list of ideas and content that we'll be putting up here shortly. Be working with Dan to capture some of that. So man, I think that covers it. You reminded me of a deadline of Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal that's coming up. So I have an article in there all about my tag and application strategy. And also this episode, I'm really pumped in. They're going to have me write the anchor point in it. So, I've been reading that anchor point for probably 20 years, and all the guys have done such a great job at writing it. So pretty pumped I get to write the anchor point in this issue as well. So yeah, we're working on that all the time.
Yep. Lots of new stuff with the magazine, of course, and application season. That's where TagHub comes into play. And check our updates and email me anytime. I'm submersed into Western hunting application season with all the states. And so if anybody has any questions, you can email me at dan.p@eastmans.com. I'm always happy to help with that. And we've been starting to update like we have in the Elk Collective with some state updates for application season inside the course, and it's on the blog too at theelkcollective.com with some of the new things and some of the things that I really like to pay attention to when it comes down to deciding where you're going to apply for. So updates in all sorts of places, never ending places to read our content. And thank you everybody for being involved and listening to this podcast as well.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah. Well, and we'll get right into the podcast. I just, man, I saw that we had a couple more reviews come in for the podcast. So, man, that always just helps us out so much when you leave a review on the iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening to podcasts. So we did have a couple new ones come in, Dan. So I was just going to read them here. So AB Fromco. So this is a buddy of mine. He's been on Eastman's Elevated. He's a great guy, loves our content, but he left us a review. Brian and Dan are two of the best bow hunters in the business. These guys live the blue-collar DIY bow hunting lifestyle and share everything they know through this show and their platforms. This is a must-follow podcast for any bow hunter out there. Pull up a chair, get out your notebook. So much to be gained from this show. So thanks to him for putting out that review. So just some good ones. We just really appreciate the reviews and support of the podcast, and appreciate you guys listening in each and every week. So thanks, guys, and thanks to you, Dan. Let's get into this podcast. It's a good one.
Heck yeah, can't wait. Let's do it. We've actually warmed up a little bit. The negative 40 temps are gone for now, but yeah, just a busy time of year, working on articles, working on the MRS for the magazine, and doing a bunch of updates and work on the mule deer course and the elk collective. So yeah, just lots going.
Oh, that's a good reminder for me, Dan. We have our editorial deadline coming up here in about 5 or 6 days. I sat down and wrote the article for it, but I need to go back through it and fine tune it and get my pictures together, get it over to Todd there so he can make me look good.
Yeah, no, I'm same boat. I'm scrambling a little bit. In Montana, they came out with their new elk management plan for statewide 2023. They do it every several years. I think maybe once a decade they like really revamp it. And so just kind of going through that unit by unit and trying to soak in, what the mentality of the state is at the moment. And they have a bunch of statistics. It's interesting to see the hunter effort or the hunter days in all these different units and how much pressure each unit has gained or it's declined. Like in Region 1, it was interesting. Like I grew up in Region 1. I think most guys probably know that, in Montana, Northwest Montana. And in the last 15 years, hunter pressure has declined by a third. Wow. So, yeah, and that's, I think, a direct reflection of the lack of animals up in that country. And so guys have gone east. I know a lot of my resident buddies have gone east where the animals are. But, of course, there's a lot less public land east, and a lot more elk now and animals in general. Well, I shouldn't say that because mule deer numbers are struggling a little bit, but a lot more elk now that are in that private interface, and a lot less elk now in the western part of the state on the public land. So there's a lot of issues that FWP might not even be able to address. I think I've said this in the past too, is I don't envy FWP trying to keep everybody happy because they're kind of in a tough spot.
No, I know we talked about that Mule Deer Advisory Council and the different meetings they're going to do to help control those mule deer numbers, which is great. And then, we didn't get too bad of an elk harvest around here this last year. They just didn't get the weather. I didn't see too many dead bulls around. I am so surprised in a high pressure unit how well those elk can hide after the rut. It's just a totally different season, or almost like different species when you're hunting elk that post rut.
Yeah, that's kind of what we experienced in some of the areas here too. And I was talking to Andrew Gillett the other day. He does the MRS for Arizona, and he kind of said the same thing. The weather was really mild, and especially during the rut, the archery elk rut in Arizona, really mild weather, nice temps, and he felt like that the elk didn't really rut as hard. There wasn't as much action as there normally is on like maybe a cooler year. And so he felt that just not as many elk got harvested during the fall seasons this year. So I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, good takeaways from that, the elk study that you're reading into. I got to dive into that as well and see. But yeah, I know some of the places that I like to hunt special tags. They made a change a couple of years ago. When you draw a special archery tag, you have to hunt in that unit. And it's probably a good change for elk numbers. It doesn't make much sense because I draw an archery only tag and I can only hunt that archery only tag in that unit. But then once rifle season gets here, I can hunt a different unit. So it's like I felt like it really only hurt me in my hunting just because, I like to play it year by year because, like in the breaks, if they don't get the sweet clover or they get a real dry year, those elk will be in private. Or if they get a good grow season, you get good grass, good sweet clover, they're all over in the breaks like they should be. And then same thing, with like my local ranges here around Southwest Montana. It's like if you get good feed, they stay in the high country and they rut pretty good, and then you can get the weather also, which I've got the weather pretty well dialed in if we get those early snowstorms. So like what it did is it forces me, if I draw that tag, I have to hunt it, which is fine. It works out fine. But yeah, it's just like you never quite know until you get to summer. And by that time, you've already made your decision where you're going to elk hunt. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But I know a lot of those tags out east are getting a lot tougher to draw. They made some changes. They cut the tags back. They stopped grouping together those units and split them off into their own separate unit, separate tag or whatever. And they've cut the numbers trying to bring the population back. But gosh, I saw the drawing odds, and it used to be about guaranteed for a resident in a couple of these units I like to draw. Now it's about 40% or 30% with 0 points, and doesn't really jump much with 1 point either, So yeah, things are changing all the time.
Yeah, and that's like we've talked about so many times, is just staying on top of that, and all these states, different management, weather changes, population changes. It's a lot to keep up on, and it's a full-time job to really be in the know in the details with all this. And like you said, the weather plays such a huge part, and you can pick your units. And by the time we pick our units and we apply for our tags, it's the middle of spring or early spring. You don't really know how things are going to pan out. So just like hunting is hunting, it's a crapshoot a lot of the time.
Well, and you have to be careful with your dates too. I'll get messages about dates, and guys will say, well, I've got these dates around the 14th, or I've got these dates around the 30th. The moon phase does this. And, for me, the moon, like I try to pay attention more to it, but I just can't. It's just like, I just don't care. I'm just going to go hunt. But in the same breath, if you plan your days to go hunt elk and you get a hot weather pattern, or it's smoky hot, like early September or something like that, yeah, it can be a totally different hunt from the year prior. And I know, last year it seemed like the rut around here didn't kick off, in my areas till after the 15th, where the year before, like the 10th to the 15th, were dynamite dates and not much hunting pressure. And so it can just be year to year depending on weather too.
Yeah. I experienced a little bit of oddities with that this year too. And granted, we were hunting pretty early, but I went into one of my areas that I know very well. But I went in opening day, September 1st, of archery in Wyoming, and I saw all these bulls. But some of them, it was weird. Actually, most of them were just acting like summer bulls, and then there were a lot of them that had shed their velvet and rubbed, but that's about the extent of what they did. They were still white horned and just acting like summer bulls, not even considering any bugling. But it was like the rut was late. We're just behind a little bit on our rut this year too, a little bit, and it turned on later, and it was really good. But I don't know if it's because the wet year and the green up and timing, and so they were just relaxed and doing summer bull things on September 1st. But yeah, it's interesting, and it definitely varies every year depending on the weather.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that keeps it exciting, is it's like always a moving target, or it's always changing, and it is magic when you hit it right. And if you spend enough days in the woods, you get those good days, those magic in the elk woods where you get the rut. It seems like, I'll get it every single year. You just have to spend your time in the woods, and you may have a few slow days leading up to it, or you may have to go find the elk. But eventually it seems like you can run into and find some good hunting. But yeah, man, it's going to be fun. I'm just so jacked for this upcoming season. I know you are as well. And we're trying to put out these podcasts that are really pertinent to the time of year. And so we've done a couple on our tags and applications. And here we are again, like we started the podcast, and we're talking about it again just because it's so fresh in our minds. But another thing that I like to do this time of year, is like get all my gear dialed and situated. And my gear dialed for my day pack, for my weekend trips, and then also for my extended trips. And I like to really go through my gear and look and see where I can use a good upgrade, because I can't upgrade all my gear every year. And so it's like picking and choosing. And so right now, like, I'm setting up the bow and making sure my gear is all dialed there. And, I always have a couple changes here or there that I'm making, and then start diving into all my gear and see where I can get like the most benefit out of a gear upgrade. And I suppose we're so similar that you're probably doing the same thing, Dan.
Yeah. Every year I'm trying to refine my setup, refine my system, whether it be a new stove or a different pair of gloves, or new arrows. That's the thing too, is there's kind of different categories where, with equipment, you might use arrows every year and you have to buy new ones because you broke them or shot them or lost them or whatever. And then there's other things like, a sleeping bag that you're going to have several years of use with. So there's definitely different categories, but and then some things might go on sale that you can get on, good discounts, and then other things you're probably going to have to pay full price. Maybe it's a premium product, or maybe it's just, a brand or a piece of equipment that you believe in, you can't live without, and you're going to pay full price. It's just the way it is because you have to have it. I'm in that category as well, but I'm also looking for deals. And, before I really started working for Eastman's, I was fresh out of college, bow hunting as much as I could, scrimping together gear. I was a guide at the time, so I did get some guide discounts on clothes, on hunting, coats, jackets, all that stuff. And so that helped, but I was always looking for deals. I'm buying bare shaft arrows on eBay and I'm fletching them myself, and, buying different broadheads. I mean, back in those days, you could get a 3-pack of steel broadheads, Slick Tricks, for like $22.99. And those days are over. I mean, getting broadheads or getting gear that's cheap. So, yeah, that's kind of something that we wanted to touch on today, and maybe dive in on, what we do and what our tricks of the trade are. And that I feel like there's a lot more to it than we give credit for, because we don't really think about it. We've been doing this a long time, and I think that, I'm pretty set up. I'm pretty refined, but I'm always looking for new stuff. So that's what really matters. As long as you're keeping your eyes open, you're paying attention to your kit, your setup, and you're like, what can I improve on? And that's what matters. And that's the bow hunting mentality. The Western bow hunting mentality is, what can I improve on? And if you have that mentality, you're just going to get better and better. And we've had great conversations about that too in the past. But yeah, there's so much to it. It's like, man, where do we start?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll start with some of my purchases here recently. And so, I've been setting up and working on that lift. Man, do I have that thing shooting so good. I had to mess with mine quite a bit, my shim kit, just to find a tune for the power path of the string there. But a couple of the upgrades I made this year is I usually keep a couple bows fully set up. So a bow and a backup bow. And then I have like 3 setups for bows. So then I can just move a setup to the new bow, phase out one. And so, I'm sticking with a lot of the same setup that I have been. I'm messing around with the detachable quiver from Matthews, but I don't like that it's just a 5 arrow. So I'm trying to figure out how to get a couple more arrows into that thing and make it work, or if I'm going to stick to like an old quiver that'll hold 6. So I'm messing with that. And then really just like trying to get like more streamline the process of setting up these bows. So I did purchase a draw board this year, so I no longer have my wife looking at the timing of my bow and trying to let off the back wall and come back in. Now with this draw board, I can pull my bow back to full draw. I can get better poundage readings off of it. I can just be more precise with the tune, which I think is helping out. And then the other thing I purchased here recently, and this was Kane Reinhardt that I just had on Eastman's Elevated recommend this sight jig. And so this sight jig, like to get my sights level on my bow, I was always having to level the limbs, level the sight or the sight post there, and then level the bubble inside. And it's just so tough to like hold everything right and get it all right. And then my third axis, I just have to go shoot it. I'd make adjustments. It'd be like a couple week process. With this sight jig, I'm able to set everything up on a level surface. I'm able to get all my axes set just perfect. And then you can actually tilt it and get third axis set. And I know from like shooting that shot ID from Matthews, that I don't have much or any torque on my bow when shooting consistently. So I know that third axis will be right. Of course, I'll proof it, but those are some of the things I'm working on. And then that peep, I used that total peep last year, which I really like the dark surround. And then this year I went to what is that Raptor peep? It's by oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it now. I'm drawing a blank, but I went to a little bit bigger size. I've been shooting 3/16 and went to a 7/32 in it. And so it's a Hamsky peep. And I really like it. It's shooting really accurate and just seems to really fit like my sight picture well. So those are like a couple of the purchases I've kind of made lately in setting up my bow. You have any changes to your bow you made this year, Dan? Any new sights or anything like that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting, hearing about all this. And I shoot a 7/32 peep as well. What it's funny how peeps they're one of those things that I'm really finicky with. And I really, a 3/16 is too small. Obviously, theoretically you're going to be more accurate with a smaller peep, right? There's less room for error when you have that smaller hole to look through. But I have had issues in the past, just low light, gathering enough light, seeing my pins through that peep. So I bumped it up a little bit. And it's amazing, how just a little bit bigger of a peep makes a huge difference. I don't like 1/4 inch though. It's too much.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't feel as precise. I don't feel like I'm as accurate with a 1/4 inch peep. So that's a great tip. And this is the time of year to mess with different peeps and different peep sizes. But that's huge. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. But as far as sights go, I've been shooting that dialed archery, that Arxos.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have that Montana Black Gold, the dual track. It's that dual pin sight. And I'm struggling, like I'm on this, this battle with these two sights of which I'm going to gravitate more towards. And I used both of them last season, if you can imagine that. But it's really easy with the bridge lock, where you can just get a sight set up, and then you can take it out and then slide another sight back in and set it up. And then they're pretty interchangeable. You can take them one out, put the other one in, and be dialed with it. But there's little things about those two sights that the traits I like about each of them, and there's some that I don't like about each of them. So I'm trying to find, what works best for me and what my brain processes the best. And what I mean by that is those vertical pins. With the Black Gold, there's 2 vertical pins, and then the dialed, I got the scope with the 3 vertical pins. But I find that in hunting situations, I'm not using that second and third pin. And maybe it's because I've shot just a single pin vertical for so long. My brain is programmed that way to use it. But that you have a second pin that's, your top pin might be set at 30, and that's what you kind of sighted in for. And then that second pin, mine ended up being like 48 yards, and then the third pin was like 67 yards. But for example, instead of using that third pin down at the bottom of the scope, at 67 yards, I find that I just need to dial the sight and use the middle pin anyway, because everything's centered. I just feel like I'm more accurate that way. And so, and I didn't really know that, until you try it. And so I'm still not, too sure which sight I'm going to use. And I, like I said, I split times this year with the dialed and the black gold. But I feel like, on the black gold with the needle on the sight tape, I feel like that's more precise, and I really prefer that than a sight tape on a round wheel where you have to be at, a certain angle to feel like you're precise and that you're exactly at 42 yards or whatever it is. Whereas the black gold, it's on a vertical, flat surface, very precise. So I like the precision of the black gold. Now, on the dialed, the sunshade on the pins, I really prefer that sunshade over that. Basically, it's like a transition shade on the black gold, where you get more UV light on the fiber optic cover, it darkens, and less light and it lightens. And I just feel like those pins can be too bright for me. I don't know if you have that. In the past with my astigmatism, I would just have like the starburst or like a bunch of blur around my pin. So I find that on that Arxos, I can close that shade and I can really manage the brightness of my pins. So whether it's cloudy or it's bright out, I have to see my pins crystal clear to feel like that I can really make the shot that I need to make in a hunting situation. And so those are kind of the little things I was paying attention to and deciding, which I like best. But I have been gravitating toward the dialed Arxos because of that shade of all the silly things, of all the technology that's out there. That's what I'm gravitating towards, because I just see those pins easier with the different lighting conditions, and I can manage the brightness of my pins just with that simple slide on the scope. So, man, I could go on and on and on about all these little things, and it's important. It definitely is important. Other parts of my bow that I try to, if it's not broke, I don't fix it, and that's my arrow rest. I like that QAD Integrate 2, the second version arrow rest. It's a cable driven rest. I've gotten a lot of questions in the past, like, why don't you shoot a limb driven rest versus a cable driven? And I'm simple, and I have shot a limb driven rest in the past, and I don't like the length of cord from the rest to the limb, that I've got it caught on things before, and that makes me uncomfortable, like catching that cord on brush or whatever, and that could affect the tune of the rest or how much it lifts or anything like that. So I feel that if a cable driven rest is properly tuned, it's just a short cord from the rest to the cable, and that's just less to catch on. It's less that can go wrong, and it's less that it's out there. It's like all contained a little bit better. And so once again, that's other things I think about. And so I just prefer a good quality cable driven rest that locks up in the up position and full capture. So those are just a little bit of the things that I think about. I haven't changed my rest setup in years, and I don't plan to. It's good to reevaluate each component on your bow and to get better with and try new things and whatnot. But for the most part, I'm with you too with that single piece, that one piece quiver that Matthews has, 5 arrows. I like 6 arrows. I think back to all the times I've ever quiver dumped on a hunt, and I think it's been about once. And I think I may have quiver dumped last year in Hawaii axis deer hunting, but that was just like multiple animals. I was shooting at, lots of animals that were going by, but like on a Western hunt, when things go really crazy and go awry, I've quiver dumped one time on a mule deer about 10 years ago, where I was too wound up and I missed, and I had a deflection and I hit him bad, and then I hit him bad again. And, those are the things that we try to, not let happen in the future, and knock on wood, that hasn't happened in quite a long time. But I've gone back with that mental battle back and forth too. It's like, man, it would be nice to have a couple extra arrows. It's just a sense of security that you have maybe with 6 or 7 arrows. But in all reality, have I ever used 5 arrows? And it's like, man, one time back in the day. That's all I can think of. But it's weird. So what's your thoughts with that quiver? Like you were saying, you brought that up too, and it's something that I don't usually talk about. But what's your thought process behind that 5-arrow quiver too?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm like you. I think I've had one quiver dump in my career, and it was a bad deal, you know. But I did end up getting the animal, and a lot of times it's like those finish up shots. If you don't get a good shot in, and then you're trying to put another arrow in them, and maybe it's a long shot or who knows. But yeah, it's like that would be a helpless feeling to not have ammo. And so most of the time it's one arrow, two arrows at worst, and I'm good to go. But I just like to have them for like these backcountry hunts where you don't know what's going to happen and may get a miss or something like that. And I hate to just be down on arrows or worried about arrows. And also, I got to have an arrow in to check my sight. And like sometimes there isn't the softest ground or log to shoot in, and I'll end up ruining an arrow just checking on my sight. And I know, I plan to hunt Colorado this year, and that's above 13,000 feet. The air is really thin, and my arrows seem to hit just a touch high. And so I like to check that. And, the longer the shot, the more exaggerated the arrow is going to be high on that shot. So, yeah, I mean, I used to love a 7-arrow quiver, and even with my 6-arrow quiver, a lot of times I'll have an extra arrow tucked in there, figure out a way to get another arrow in there. So I've got the 7, but I just don't want to be low on ammo. I just want to have enough arrows no matter what happens, what kind of situation I get in, that I've got enough ammo. But you're right. It's like, I don't know. Maybe worried about something that's never going to happen, and 5 is plenty for a hunt. But yeah, I like to have enough ammo just in case. And then I'm with you on that QAD rest. I've had some really experienced archers tell me that that QAD can fail on you, and that you really should shoot a Hamsky rest, and that's the best one going. I think it comes down to personal preference. And I had a rest that failed me about, I don't know, maybe it was like 7 to 10 years ago, and it failed me a couple of times. In fact, it failed me on a great big bull elk hunting below 0, and the oil got cold in it, and it didn't fall away, and my arrow just porpoised right in front of me and hit the snow in front of me and didn't even make it to the bull. And that's when I made the change to the QAD. And I just have a tough time like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And the QAD works in all weathers, all temperatures, all moisture. I also shoot the cable driven. Cable driven just works for me. It doesn't let me down. I love being able to pop up the rest and put my arrow in there and then falls away. And honestly, like, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 years of using that QAD. I like that it mounts to the, it's got that integral system where it mounts to the riser of the bow instead of just one bolt that holds it where it could swivel or something like that. So I like that. And then, dude, it's been 7, 8 years of thousands of 10,000s of arrows per year, and then shooting at all these critters. That arrow rest has never let me down. And so I've built trust in it. So it's like one archer can tell me that, maybe he's seen a guy or heard a guy or had a problem himself, but it's just like, man, it has never let me down. And that's the trust I need in my equipment. So yeah, I just keep with that rest the same, and then, yeah, arrows this year, like, arrows are a tough one, man. We talked earlier. I dropped that tip. You're talking about saving money. That Alibaba, which is that Chinese website or whatever. I was able to order 10 dozen arrows off that, and it is order at your own risk, and then able to order some components and build these arrows. I was able to build 10 dozen arrows for about $30 a dozen. And I found this fletching profile that I really like. So I'm back to my Fletch, but I'm not using the Silent Night 200s. I'm using this. It's called an FFP 300. It's a 3-inch, really small profile vane, and I fletch it in a 4-fletch with a really good helical on it. As much helical as I can get on my Bits and Burger jig. And man, I've got that. It's really low profile, so I don't get much wind drift or wind drag with it. And then it's steering, big fixed blade broadheads as well as the expandables I like to shoot really well. So I'm getting just some great groups out of those arrows. And of course, got the perfect spine through Archer's Advantage, the perfect cut, able to build up those arrows and really able to get out of there fairly inexpensive, and we've been playing with some new arrows like the G5s, and I'm not sure if that's what I'll use this season, but the arrows are built up, they're strong, and they're hitting accurate, and good weight like the weight tolerance on them, they're all within about 3 grains of each other. And so really to save a pile of money, you have to wait about a month for them to ship. And I definitely like supporting American made, but all these arrow companies are just getting their shafts from these places anyways, and so able to save some money on those and have some good arrows built up. So that's a way to save some money this year.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great tip. And I was going to actually bring that up. We got a question on Instagram on the post that I made. And it says, Jeremy Ryan 07, what arrows are you guys going to shoot since Method is out of business? And man, Brian, that's a great tip to do. And that's something that anybody can go and save a bunch of money on, whether, you get them direct from Alibaba, like you said, like that, or you buy bare shafts on eBay. Sometimes you can find closeouts. I've seen arrows on Black Ovis, closeout arrows, but I'm kind of with you. And maybe arrow brands, arrow companies won't like me saying this, but I go for the cheapest arrows possible that are within quality reason, like within, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not going to just shoot a no name, cheap arrow that I don't know about, or I don't know any of the specs on, anything like that, or
yeah, well, we get to know these arrows so much that we know what quality components are. We know what straightness tolerance, weight tolerance. We cut the back of the arrow, the front of the arrow, get the straightest part of it. And so we've just found that, we can get really good accuracy for an inexpensive arrow. In fact, we shot those Blood Sports, I can't remember the exact brand, but the smaller diameter Blood Sports for years, which is a budget arrow. But I love that front end component, the weight, the ballistic collar on the front that protected the end of the shaft. So I was just able to get, I wasn't a big fan of their Nox. I would switch those out for another brand. But once you get to know archery and arrows, you can just you can build up some pretty quality arrows and save some money there for sure.
Yeah. And that's huge. And it doesn't mean that, you shouldn't go out there and spend a bunch of money on, a quality, 1000 straightness arrow that's a really good, arrow to shoot. Maybe you don't have the time to deal with like what Brian's talking about when you're kind of mixing, matching and finding what works. And I know that, if you bought a bunch of shafts like what you did, Brian, and then you go to like Ethics Archery and the components that they make and the components are what make your arrow, in my opinion, is really what makes or breaks it, because as Brian said, 90% of the carbon that we're shooting or that we see on the market comes from about 2 different places in China. And there's some exceptions. I think Gold Tip makes some of theirs in Mexico, and
Gold Tip has some great arrows too.
Yeah, and they're great arrows. They are.
And if you buy a trusted brand like that, you're getting a good arrow. So there's nothing against going out and buying a top brand. Me and you just do so much hunting and shooting that it dang near breaks the bank for a year.
Yeah, especially when some of these arrows $300 a dozen, and you're going on multiple hunts, it gets expensive real quick. But what I've always gravitated towards was Victory. I like their components. I think their oversert has been fantastic in the last few years. They've redesigned it a few times over the last decade. So I really do like Victory VAPs. These G5 Marks 203, and then I think there's a 3 something, or maybe it's a 246, but they're kind of a new arrow on the market, and they make theirs in-house, which I thought was really interesting, these G5 Mark 3s. But I'm kind of with you, Brian. Like I'm really finicky and weird about my vanes too. And when I'm lazy, when on one year I don't have a lot of time, or I don't make the time, I get some of these arrows. I'll shoot blazers, I think blazers are loud. They have a big face on the profile of the vane. So I think probably 5 years ago or so, you turned me on to some of the Fletch product and the Silent Nights and the profile of those vanes and how much more quiet they are. I haven't shot the FFP 300s that you were talking about. So I wanted to kind of go to that. Like when you're changing your vane to those new Fletch vanes, 3 inch. So you get, a little bit longer profile than the 2.25 inches that we've seen so much, but they're a shorter profile as well. Is that what you're going for, is clearance and probably sound as well? They make less sound. What's your mentality on that?
Yeah, sound and then wind drift. I live in a windy place and I'm constantly shooting in the wind and I know how much it affects my arrow. And so it's a smaller profile. If you can get a 4 fletch instead of a 3 fletch, it's the same profile sideways as the arrows going down range. But that smaller profile, I get less wind drift. I also less sound. And so I like to set up my phone down there and then like hear those arrows come in and hear the noise of them. And that smaller profile just cuts less wind and makes less noise. I get less wind drift. And then the determining factor, though, is that they've got to steer broadhead. So you can go too small, and then I'm getting erratic broadhead flight. So I'm constantly like trying to balance that. And so this is a smaller fletch for me, and I did good. Like it's a similar profile to like that fletch I shot last year that Method had. Method had those those vanes. They had like, I don't know how to describe it, but like the length of the arrow, they had cuts in the vanes for better steering. And I noticed those are a bit noisy. And so I didn't like that, but I did like the profile and the way my arrows were flying. And so I'll build up a half dozen, I'll tune my bow to them, and then I'll go outside and just shoot groups with them and then shoot broadheads with them, make sure they're going to steer broadheads. And once I can kind of dial all that in, then I know I've got a fletching I like. And yeah, I'm so happy with this FFP 300 because I'm getting less wind drift than I would with those Silent Night 200s, and I'm still getting the good broadhead flight. But yeah, those are some of the characteristics I'm looking for in a fletch.
So you're really emphasizing that wind drift and lower profile, and still giving you the steering that you need for a fixed broadhead, which that's definitely good. And I think it's going to be different for everybody's application. Maybe some guys out east, you're not hunting in strong winds. Maybe you're not going to emphasize that as much, but man, there's a lot of scenarios in Western hunting that even I feel like my drift isn't too bad, at 297 feet per second. It's not one of those things that I'm really worried about, but it's crazy what wind can do to arrows and especially wind that's unforeseen, like shooting across like a gulch or a sharp canyon. Maybe you're goat hunting, the wind out there that you can't see or feel, that really affects the flight of an arrow, like feet. I've heard stories of guys missing goats with their bows because there's no way to gauge the wind across one of these steep chutes, and they're missing a goat by like 5 feet. So it's really interesting and crazy how much wind can play a role on the drift of your arrow.
Oh man,
It's
100%. It's crazy. It blows my mind, man. It's like yeah, because I deal with winds. I deal with like a direct broadside or a quartering wind, but even like a 3 to 5 mile or just like a thermal wind out there, on a longer shot on a 50, 60, 70, something like that, it really wind drifts an arrow from the impact point. And it is so tough to gauge the wind and read it when you're shooting across the canyon, or even just like an evening thermal wind coming downhill, and just can make the difference if I can get less wind drift. And then wind drift is double on a broadhead than it is a field point. Even our low profile expandables, like it'll blow that arrow double the distance than it will a field point. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to factor this all in. And it is because I just live in such windy country and shoot groups all the time and see how it affects it. But also these places that I hunt are windy and can be on the longer side for shots. definitely in the 40, 50, 60, and even stretching a touch further than that. And I just like a low profile just gives me the confidence that my arrow isn't going to wind drift a bunch. I'm going to hit where I'm aiming.
Yep. Yep. That's huge. And like you said too, I do prefer like a 3-inch vein too. And so you're picking up more steering with the length of your vein instead of the high profile, which I like as well. And I like the clearance. I don't like really high profile veins either. Just around my cable guard, I like to feel like I have like excellent clearance around my cable guard, and you can clock obviously your knocks, so you have clearance and everything through there. But same thing, I like a little bit longer, shorter profile vein for sound too. I believe they're quieter and wind drift that profile. That's a great tip. So if I think anybody that's listening, if you're going to take something away from it, consider that maybe a little bit longer vein and a shorter profile. I think the advantages are that are there are going to outweigh any disadvantage.
Yeah, yeah, spot on. Well, gosh, we could go we'll almost go a whole episode on our bows and we haven't even
Yeah,
got to
yeah.
our gear yet. So, gear for this year, I think it starts with the clothing as well. It's so nice to have like a good technical setup for all different temperatures and weather that you're going to see. And I do a lot of the early season hunts. I know you do too. I was really impressed this year. Cryptek, they came out with a new pant. So the Sonoran pant, Sonoran shirt was good and worked good for me, but I upgraded it last year and saw so many benefits. The air just moved through my clothing better to help keep me cool. And so I went, I believe it's called their Moab pant, and it's not really a hunting pant. It's like more like a quick drying fishing pant or whatever, but it's fairly quiet and super thin. I loved that pant last year. And then also they came out with that bamboo hoodie. And it just seemed like it breathed better than the Sonoran hoodie. It was so lightweight. It just seems like the wind just carries through it. And so that bamboo hoodie for me last year for my early season hunts was absolutely clutch, man. I love my early season gear last year.
Yeah, just phenomenal pieces. That bamboo is amazing too. And I like, that really thin material. And ultimately, I just want to keep the sun off me. I love the hood with it on those early season hunts, but the lightweight ness of it. And I felt like it didn't really get smelly as easy either as
Mhm.
some of the polyester stuff.
Yeah, I found that as well. So yeah, I was super stoked on that. My shoes are dialed. Like, you were always looking for upgrades, shoes and boots. Of course, I really like the low cut shoes. And my buddy that was my friend and then also my guide on that goat hunt, I show up with tennis shoes and he kind of gave me a sideways look. But I'm just like, I have so much agility and coordination in them. And I work in shoes, I run in shoes. I also feel like bow hunting, it gives me a better connection to the ground and I can stalk better in them. And so, a lot of this is like personal preference, but again, I'm a shoe guy. Those Zamberlins have just been money. I like a waterproof shoe because I want my feet to stay dry if it rains or if it snows. And I can wear Gators in the snow and my feet don't get wet. And Zamberlin does a great job at waterproofing. I also like it that I don't get a bunch of dust in my shoes. So, my feet, I don't pull it out and they're just black with dust on there, which can grind on your feet too and cause sore spots. So shoes were dialed. Zamberlin, I always pronounce them wrong, but the Salus are really good. And then also use the Free Blast, has like a little bit bigger toe box, which is nice. And then oh gosh, I'm trying to remember that black set that I'm wearing. The Anabasis. The Anabasis are just killer. They feel like a running shoe to me. And they make all these in a low cut boot as well. I use the tennis shoe model, but those were money for me this past year as well.
Yeah, yeah. They are a great boot, and the lightweightness is huge. And the big thing I want to talk about too is that we use equipment like brand specific, me and you do, Brian, but if you're on a budget out there and maybe you're looking for a deal and maybe you can't afford some of the top end stuff that we're talking about, it's out there. And whether, and this is the time of year too, we're in January, we're thinking about gear. There's sales going on, people are getting rid of gear from their past season. Maybe they didn't use it last year, and so they're getting it. So check eBay and check Facebook Marketplace. It's amazing what I see pop up on these websites, and talk about deals, maybe just lightly used equipment that you can get for, half off. And don't get too stuck on the brand. It's nice, obviously, to know that a certain brand works for you and you're going to stick to it, like what we're talking about. But maybe you're just getting into it and you're on a budget and you don't really know what works best for your feet, maybe for your style of hunting, and maybe you want to branch out a little bit. So keep an eye out for used stuff. There's nothing wrong with buying used stuff. And clothing this time of year too is the time to buy clothing. There's a lot of sales going on. There's a lot of closeouts going on, getting ready for the new year. Do not wait for the last minute to get your gear, new hunting, apparel. If you wait till June, July, you might not even get it. You're going to be paying full retail, and it's just you're not going to have the selection that you're going to have right now if you're really keeping an eye out on those eBay auctions or Facebook or just sales in general. So don't feel like you have to pay full price. Watch for deals, and that's why we watch too. And I watch year round for deals, and a lot of stuff. Whether we're sponsored or not, but some of the stuff where we're not sponsored, I will buy gear if it's what I'm looking for and it's on sale. If it's a good price, I'm probably going to buy it because I like it, because I know it works for me, and I'm not going to pay full retail, but I'm going to stay patient. I'm going to keep my eyes out. And so always keeping those feelers out is so important. This time of year when it's the off season and guys aren't really, thinking about gear right now for the most part.
These companies that we're using, we trust in. And I really think like the Cryptek, I have this great system. So if you want to spend the money with a brand that you really like and be brand loyal, you're going to get great gear and you can upgrade it as you go. But Dan's right. Like for years in the early 2000s, none of these hunting companies were producing great technical gear. And so, I was using a lot of mountaineering gear from these mountaineering companies, and they were solid colors, and I killed a ton of bucks with them. And so, yeah, you can shop for this gear. Dan mentioned Facebook Marketplace, getting used gear, and just look for these quality brands are all building great gear. And even though we believe in our system, you don't have to go with that system to have gear to go out there and kill a nice buck or a nice bull. So yeah, just be crafty. Like Dan loves a good deal. I love a good deal as well. And, you can shop around and find these things, especially right now in this off season. So be crafty with that stuff as you're upgrading your gear, and don't break the bank. Like I learned a long time ago, it used to be you'd order your gear out of Cabela's, out of the catalog that would come in the mail. I'm kind of dating myself here, but that was like the one place to get your gear. And I remember this one season, I had all this gear picked out I wanted to upgrade to, and this new camo and new backpack or whatever it was. And I remember at the time I went out and I spent, $1,000 or a little bit more, which is probably like $5,000 or $10,000 in today's money or whatever. But it was a ton of money for me at the time. And then I got into hunting season, and I didn't have the money to put gas in my rig. I didn't have the extra money to pay my bills to be able to take the time off work. And so I had all this great gear, but I didn't have the money or the time to be able to go use it. And so like I learned my lesson that year, and I'm like, I will make do with the gear I have and the work clothes I have. And I will make do like upgrading 1 or 2 pieces of gear a year, so I have that money to go hunt, And so I think that is an important lesson, is you have to be crafty. As hunting gear is expensive, and we love these brands and ride for them, the ones that we use and really believe in their gear. But there's also some deals out there to be had, and just be crafty with it.
Yeah, that's what it is. And that just plays right in to the crafty nature of being a bow hunter. You got to be crafty in the markets. You got to be crafty when it comes to putting your kit together. And that just goes hand in hand with being a bow hunter out there on public land trying to get it done. It's a mindset that carries over to so many different facets of preparation as well. And some other things too that maybe I don't, have the best, or maybe the most extensive knowledge or know every little piece and part of a setup of like headlamps or stoves, and some of these small things, lights like tent lights. Like I don't know what maybe the best things out there, or the best pieces out there are, and there's only one way for me to find out is use them. And so I'll buy, when it comes down to some of the small things, I'll buy new things without any intel on them, or maybe very minimal intel on them, and test them out. Do I like them? Do I don't? And if it's, a not a big investment, then I'll probably do it, because it's amazing too how many of these little things matter in the field, in your setup, in camp. A headlamp. That's one of the biggest things that, like, I just have to have a good headlamp. I'm tired of cheap headlamps that, maybe the lens gets scratched up. They're not, and they're not bright. They burn through batteries. It just drives me nuts. And so I'm always looking for the next best headlamp. And I found the Peaks. I think you use it too, Brian, is the Peaks Duo. And just talk about a great headlamp that it's just like everything was thought of when it came to a good headlamp for the backcountry bow hunter. And we've talked about it a little bit, but you got a double button sequence, and that'll turn the headlamp off. That'll lock it off so it can't be turned on in your backpack. That's huge. I don't know how many times I've came into camp after backpacking in, and my headlamp's on because it got mashed on in my pack, and half the batteries are burned down. Now with that Peaks, I don't even bring an extra battery because that thing lasts a week. I very rarely charge it up, and it's bright. You got the red light, which I really like, and once again, you can lock it off so it can't turn on. So just the little things. Maybe you feel like maybe you're a veteran hunter, you're a seasoned hunter, and you feel like you got all your major gear pieces dialed in. Now's the time to look at all the little things and dial in all those the little things of the luxury items of camp life in the backcountry, because it is sure nice to have some of them.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I love that Peaks. I love how you can't put it on upside down, how it'll go both directions. And then I have the first generation one, and the only complaint I had with the first generation one is when the battery gets low, it blinks the light at you. And I think they changed that and actually put like a monitor device on the headlamp. So that may be something that I look to upgrade this year. But yeah, there's a bag of smalls that I always have with me, and that bag of smalls is on a day hunt, on an extended trip. I may add a couple things to it, but that bag of smalls makes a big difference. Like having a good, spork, a good a long handle, like you always mention, that a long handle one to eat your dehydrated meals so you're not dipping your knuckles into your bag. Just little stuff like that. I've got a little bow repair kit. I've got a fire starting kit, and also have like a couple lighters in there, like a backup. Those stove igniters, as good as those stoves are, like those igniters go out quite a bit. So always want to make sure I have, lighter with me. But just go through and lay out all that gear and look at it. And you have to be lightweight if you're backpacking and things, but it makes such a difference to have good gear or the right gear. I love using I've got the light for doing my water, which works really well for me. Takes a little bit longer. I can only do 32 ounces at a time. One of the game changers for me has been, the insulated, 32 ounce bottle. So I use, I think it's G-Light. I should make notes before we jump on this podcast, but they make one that's an insulated 32 ounce, looks like a Nalgene, but it's insulated. It is so nice to have cold water on these hot hunts, and it's so nice to keep my water from freezing in that insulated mug in like really cold temperatures. And so that insulated 32 ounce container has been a game changer for me. And then also I have a 100-ounce one that's insulated as well that keeps my water cool. And I need to get one more of those this season. My uninsulated model, I got a hole in it backpacking around, so I do need to upgrade that as well. But just go through your gear. It's so nice when you have all the right gear in your kit for these hunts, and just makes everything go smoother. You're more comfortable. You just have absolutely everything you need. So go through your kit, and like you say, I could probably upgrade some gear here or there, but I have my mattress I really like. I've got, I've been using the Stone Glacier sleeping bags, which are just absolutely money. And then, tents. Like there is a tent that works for all applications, but not all of us can own 10 different tents. And so it's like finding one that works well for you. The bivy tents seem to work really well for me. I like those. As it gets into the later season, the teepee with the stove is really nice. But a lot of times I just don't like the weight. And a lot of times I'll just use a bivy sack too, especially if I'm just going for an overnight or a 2-day. A lot of my elk hunting this year, I don't like to go for 5 to 10 days elk hunting because it's tough for me to stay into elk that long in the backcountry. It seems like I get 2-3 good days and I'm out of them. And so I like to travel really light, like in the 30-pound range, like under 40 pounds. And then I like to have all my gear with me and hunt with my backpack and go for these, 1 to 3 day missions. In the 1 to 3 days is dependent on the elk I find. And then I may come out and go up a different drainage, but I love to be mobile. And so that's going to be a big part of my strategy hunting elk this year is having that lightweight 30-pound pack, everything I need for 2-3 days, and then just being able to roam this country and camp wherever I find the elk and hunt a lot with the pack on my back, or I'll set a base camp if I'm really into the elk. But just being able to travel this light and do these shorter trips, even though my whole hunt might be 7 to 10 days, I'm only going to spend 2 to 3 days in an area. So it's a big part of my strategy this year, and I just want to make sure I've got all that stuff dialed.
Yeah, that's so important. And if you're talking like what you're talking with, backcountry, running light, able to cover the miles, you really have to take your gear selection to the next level and your checkbook to the next level too, because and I say that like for a sleeping bag, for example, the warmer they are, the more they cost. The price goes up, and that goes with the weight of them too. The lighter they are, the price goes up. And that's one thing that you don't want to skimp on is a sleeping bag. And if you really want to cut weight, it's in a sleeping bag for sure. That's a huge component of it. With down, with the lightweight material, and if you skimp on your shelter a little bit, you might need a little bit warmer of a sleeping bag than you normally would, because it's amazing how much of that thermal radiation that a tent will enclose and keep you warm, like a 4-season tent compared to like a teepee or just a rain fly that you have free airflow at night. You're going to need to really step up your sleeping bag game on that. But once again, I mean, man, you can get like some of these little tarps that are a shelter. They're a shelter for sure. They'll keep the rain off of you, but that's about what all they are. And they may weigh 8 ounces, which is huge. Whereas like a normal, like 4-season tent, you're going to be up, 3 pounds for one of those. So you have to build your kit for the style of hunting that you gravitate toward, or what you enjoy doing, ultimately. And for me, when I started off, kind of the backcountry, the lighter the better. I started off with cheap stuff, and we didn't have the gear that we have now out on the market. And so, ultimately my pack was just heavy. I was young and dumb, and my pack was heavy, and I couldn't quite go as far with that heavy pack and still be able to get back there and then be able to hunt fresh, not be too fatigued from just getting in there. And so we're spoiled nowadays with the gear that's become lighter and more effective, where we can get back there with a pack in the 30 pounds and still be fresh enough to hunt. And so, that's huge. That's huge right there. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, and we have a couple questions here, Brian, from our social media post. Luckily, most of them are about broadheads and arrows, so that'll be fairly easy. But what's your sock routine? It seems like everybody has a different mentality on socks. Some people can go 4 or 5 days on one pair. Other people like a pair every day, like me. So what do you run? And then I'll kind of tell you my mentality on socks, because that's also another great thing up your game on. Maybe everything else is dialed, but you can never have too many socks. You can never try too many socks either. And they're a cheap item too. So it's not going to break the bank.
Yeah. Socks are so crucial, and I am so fortunate, Dan. I can run any sock and I'm fine. My feet don't blister. I can wear cotton socks. I can, and I don't typically wear those on a hunt or something, but if I'm just going for a day hike or something, it just doesn't matter. My feet, they are so calloused up everywhere, and so like I put in the work to really make my feet tough. I just don't get any wear spots. I don't have any problems with moisture. My feet don't sweat a bunch, and so I can really wear about any sock. But that being said, my preference in the socks that I use during these hunts, I like to stretch out my socks now. I like to have one pair that I'll switch out. I can get about 3 days, 4 days out of a set of socks, and they start to get pretty crusty for sure. I just don't like packing the extra weight of socks. And so for me, on an extended trip, I may bring an extra set. Hardly ever will I bring 2 sets of socks, but occasionally if it's a 7 to 10 day hunt. But really, I'll have an extra set if I'm going to be more than 3 days. So 3 to 5 days, I'll have an extra set. And it's nice to be able to change them out. My preferred socks, I don't really like the thick socks. I like a thinner sock, like a thinner smart wool sock. Farm to Feet makes some great ones. Zamberlan came out with some great socks that I really like. There's a bunch of different brands out there, but I'm really fortunate, Dan, that I can wear about any sock and my feet just don't seem to mind. And so on a hunt, I'm going to bring these better socks as I think I get more life out of them, more days out of them. But really, I'm going to go 3 to 5 days with my socks before I change them out.
Yeah, and that's some good insight, and it's amazing too. As you're talking, I'm thinking about this, how depending on the time of year and the type of hunt, I'm going to kind of gauge my sock usage off that. And what I mean by that is, like, I'll use cotton socks, like early season, August, September, if the weather's fairly decent out or fairly warm, I like cotton socks. And the other thing too is my feet sweat a lot. I have hot feet, and so it's hard for me to use a pair of wool socks and not just be sweated up immediately. Obviously, with cotton socks, my feet still sweat. Cotton gets wet, and so any chance I get, if I'm taking a break or I'm eating something, my boots come off, and I'll dry my feet out and just let them air out a little bit and keep going. I'm lucky too, and I don't know, maybe we're out there a lot and we're using our feet a lot, but I can't remember the last time I got a blister. And usually if you're getting a blister, it's a boot problem, it's not a sock problem. And there's a lot of different tactics out there that kind of will help you not get blisters as easy as like a polypropylene base layer and then a sock on top of that, kind of like a slippery surface that'll help keep your feet from rubbing. But usually when I get a blister, it's from a pair of boots or shoes that don't fit right anyway, and I shouldn't be wearing those anyway. And so in that regard, I can wear any sock. I don't really get blisters. I mean, that's one thing I will say with Zamberlan boots. They all fit me really well, and I don't get blisters with them. And so that's huge. But as season gets later, October, I go to thin wool socks and then thicker wool socks later in the season. I do like cotton as well because they don't stink, like just a pure cotton sock, like on those hot, like antelope hunts, or maybe, those early season elk hunts, they don't get nasty, stinky, like some of these other like wool socks or these blends they'll get pretty stinky. I'm the type, I like fresh socks every day if I can manage it. I have a pair of cotton socks that I bring that I sleep in, like little ankle socks. Like I like that fresh feeling in my sleeping bag, so I'll have a fresh pair of socks. Otherwise, I'm taking a pair of socks for every 2 days I'm going to be hunting, 2 or 3 days. It depends on the situation. It depends on how wet my feet get. I hate to pack the extra weight, like kind of like what you addressed, Brian, but I like the feeling of fresh feet and not crusty socks either. And so it's a fine line, I feel like, but it changes so much based on the time of year and what type of hunt that I'm going on. But I will say, like, you might get a lot of people that are like, oh my gosh, you're telling people to use cotton socks. That's a death, you're going to get frozen feet. You're just waiting for something to happen. You're going to be liable, for somebody that gets frostbite or whatever. But if you use them right, they can work, and it's really not that big of a deal. I feel like if you're knowledgeable about the applications to use them in or not. But I do know a lot of people will cringe at saying to use cotton socks.
I know. I use cotton too. I work in them. I run in them. I usually bring a better pair for hunting, and I can just wear anything. But yeah, I remember Brian Call saw me, and we were doing a Western hunting summit, and we were backpacking, and we were doing 10 to 15 miles that day, and we took a break, and my bottom of my pants kind of rolled up and it exposed my ankle cotton socks, and he thought I was absolutely out of my mind. He said he would never ever use those things, but he sweats a bunch in his feet, and his feet, you can get blisters because of the dampness, and he just hated the cotton socks or whatever. And yeah, out of 30 or 40 guys that were doing this backpacking mission, I may have been the only one with cotton socks, but I can just get away with it. It's just it just doesn't bug me. My feet don't get blisters, they don't get that suck, so like I can make do with them just fine.
Love it. Love it. And that's huge too. And that kind of brought up a good thought. Like, if I'm using cotton socks, I may throw in another pair in my backpack if my feet get wet or something, or if I have a big hike up to the top of a mountain, I'm sweating hard and I'm grinding hard. I'll get to the top of the mountain and I'll switch out my socks. I'll do that too. But yeah, if you can get away with it, like I feel like they're more comfortable. They don't stink. They're cheap. They're really light. Like, a pair of cheap cotton socks doesn't weigh anything, and so I like that about them too. But yeah, if you get blisters, or if you're, and I find myself too, a lot of these mountaineering guys, or guys that are really putting on miles, they're wearing, like serious boots, and thick leather boots. Some of them have Thinsulate. That's another thing. I rarely use anything with insulation. My feet stay plenty warm on most hunts, so I don't bust out like my mountaineering boots until late season. But don't set yourself up to have sweaty feet either if you can help it. Get yourself something that breathes well, that's still waterproof. And like if you have strong ankles, or you're going on maybe not so much of a rugged hunt, I've hunted in low rise boots or shoes too. I don't always hunt in low rise shoes, just because, getting dirt or pine needles in them if you're side hilling or going down something steep, I don't like. But I won't throw out the possibility that I'll use, a low rise shoe on some of my Western hunts. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things, once again, is, find what works for you, and toughen up those feet, I guess.
Yeah, that one of the tips I use. So gators are great for snow or rain, but they do make the lower end of your legs hot, and they don't breathe real well. So they keep me dry if I have wet grass or something, and usually have my gators with me. But one of the game changers, if you're a tennis shoe guy like I am, is to find this little lightweight gator. So I have like this spandex little gator that just pretty much covers my ankle. They're a low ride, but it keeps all the dirt and debris and dust out of my shoes. It's called Dirty Girl Gators, and they're made for trail running. And you put a little piece of Velcro on the back of your shoe, and then they go over in their spandex. You can't even tell you're wearing them. They're weightless. They breathe really well, but it keeps all that stuff out of your shoes, so you're not stepping on pine needles or little pebbles or dirt all day long. So that's one of the tips I use. They're like $20 or something. Yeah, and you pick up some of those, and helps keep that debris out of your shoes.
Dirty Girl Gators. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, he did.
That's awesome.
Yeah, a little embarrassed about the name of it, but yeah, they seem to work really well for trail running anyways.
Love it. Love it. So Mars Tunpar 08, he just asked that actually on this social media post, best gators in your opinion. And I'm with you too. Like, I don't like how gators, you get sweaty on the lower end of your legs. I don't wear them that often. And people think I'm crazy, look at me like I'm an idiot because I don't wear gators, but I really don't like gators as a whole. Will I wear them in the right application, 100%. But I just don't wear Gators to wear Gators. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm the same. I wear them in wet snow, or I wear them in snow, and then I'll wear them if the grass is wet. But the minute that everything is dry, they're off. Like,
Yep.
they're in my pack, So yeah, I just wear them when necessary is all. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't really like hiking in them that much or wearing them all the time. Just only when it's necessary for me as well.
Yep. Makes perfect sense. We should go through some of these questions before we wrap this thing up.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's a lot of good ones.
Okay, great.
Hunting calling solo, would you shoot a fixed blade for frontals? Also, what bino magnification? That's from JF or J Frisian 145. Good couple questions, really.
Great questions. Yeah, I mean, the reason you'd shoot a fixed blade is for better penetration. But for me, like, shooting a frontal is just about being close and putting the arrow precisely where you want it. If you hit bone, you didn't shoot them right. And so for me, I'll shoot the same expandables that I'd shoot on any animal that I'd shoot. And I feel like you do more damage in the front that way too. So sometimes those frontal shots, you don't have a chance to make it through both lungs. But if you can get a lung and the liver and get back in there, a big expandable is going to do a bunch of cuts. So I don't think I'd prefer a fixed blade for that shot for me anyways. Like, I think I'd shoot the same broadhead. For me, it's just about being close and putting it precisely where I want it.
Yeah, no, same here. I know there's some guys that they live and die by the elk call and hunt thick country, and they're dealing with frontal stuff, and even more so like quartering towards and building setups to shoot through shoulders. Like some of the Valkyrie broadheads and some of these, single bevels and penetrating broadheads. There's an application for it. There's maybe a time and a place for it, but I just don't like to roll the dice with bone. So I don't shoot bone if I can help it. I never shoot bone.
That's me.
Yeah, put it like that. There's no reason to shoot at a shoulder, even with one of those. And guys might cringe at this, but even with a setup for it, like, you're just asking for trouble. And it works. Guys have done it and they've shot through shoulder blades, and that's great, and they've gotten kills. But the vast majority of my shots are, soft tissue shots, side, broadside quartering away, slightly quartering to frontal, like you said, frontal, straight on. I shot my whitetail in South Dakota, rattled them in to 13 yards, and it was like a slight quartering towards, and I put it in between the shoulder and, the front of his chest, and drove it right in there. I stayed away from the bone, but that was a frontal shot, which I would consider. But elk, there's less room for error. If it's not perfect, I'm not going to shoot on those frontal shots. Worst case, you call in a bull and he comes in quartering toward, a lot of times, and it depends on what happens, but if he sees you and he blows, you can usually chirp at him with a cow call and get him to stop again, quartering away as he's blowing out. If he smells you, good luck. It's probably over. But that's not my program either. I use my hybrid broadhead, big cut, and I've seen some unbelievable kills with the same broadhead, frontal, broadside, quartering away, or slightly quartering to. I will shoot those too, but I don't really consider a fixed head for hunting the thick stuff. Now, how about magnification for binoculars, Brian? Mine will vary based on the habitat and the area that I'm hunting. What do you roll with, or does your bino choice vary as far as magnification goes?
Yeah, I think there is a specific terrain that lends itself to different power binos, but it's just tough to beat a pair of 10x42s. Just those 10x is such a great magnification. Now, these new image stabilizing binos, I had a better equation going with the 12x42 than I did the 10x30s, and they're more stable, and so I can get away with those 12s, but I do realize that I've got to be really thorough with the close stuff right in front of me, or I can miss it because I've got too much magnification. So I'm really getting used to these 12x42s and like them, but it's really tough for me to beat a pair of 10x42s. Now, maybe if you were hunting thick stuff, a pair of 8x's, would work. A good pair of 8x binoculars, but I don't change much. I've ran the 10x42s almost my whole life, and went to these 12x the last I think it was just last season, and they worked really good for me. I just have to be really thorough to make sure I don't miss stuff up close. And I do like a little bit bigger field of view, but those are working for me. So I pretty much have a standard that I'll take and use everywhere. Now, if it's really big country, I may be carrying a pair of 15s or 16s that I can tripod up to pick it apart. But for the most part, that's what I'm going to run on my chest rig. What about you, Dan? You'll switch it up for where you're hunting?
Yeah, no, I will, based on what you're saying. If I'm, hunting New Zealand or the jungle or, thick country, Northwest Montana, it is nice to have a pair of 8x32s, and they're lighter, they're easier to maneuver around. But you're like, man, these are really nice. But if you can only afford one optic or, an all around, it's 10x42s all day. I've done a lot of hunting in the thicks with 10x42s as well, and don't have any issues. And they're great for open country too. If you have the I guess the luxury of buying another pair of optic, and 8 for thick stuff, or an image stabilizer, or a 15 for Arizona or some of that open country. 100%, I use those too. And any time I can, and kind of like what you've talked about in the past too with these image stabilizing binos, you can, on some of the hunts, maybe if you're not hunting like goats or antelope or something, you can get away with, just an image stabilizing bino and not bring a spotting scope, because they can kind of, it's an all around optic that can, could suit your need for everything that you're going to ask it to do. Like maybe on an elk hunt that, you don't care about trophy quality, find like a nice, a 6-point bull. You don't care, what it is. We've all been on those hunts too. Yeah. Heck yeah. I'll bring a 12 or a 14 or a 16 image stabilizing bino, and that's it if it's open country. So application can vary from hunt to hunt based on, the habitat, the terrain, the animal that you're hunting. But yeah, all around 10x42 all day, every day.
Yep. I think training your eyes too to see things, like I constantly am pulling up my binos and glassing, but you also train your eyes to look at features that are close and panning. And how many times are we hunting where we're glassing some country and all of a sudden our cameraman goes, oh, there's one he sees with his naked eye that's 200 yards that you didn't glass over some. But really training your eyes to pick up those animals without your glass, I think, is important too.
Yeah, 100%. Give your eyes a break. You might be glassing for 30 minutes or an hour, all this long range stuff. You get eye fatigue. Just every 5-10 minutes, give yourself a break. Bring those binos down and scan out to 100, 200 yards. Look at all the close stuff and just watch. Just take your time and watch. Give your eyes a break. And that kind of takes away the sometimes when you overlook some of the close things like what you're describing. But it's just good for your eyes too, to give them a break and vary the distance that you're looking at them, and you won't get that eye fatigue if you're just staring through a spotter for hours on end, or staring through your 16s for hours on end, everything out past 500 yards.
Yep.
Yeah.
What in big magnification too, it draws you into the far stuff where you miss a lot of stuff close, and I've seen it with guys with like the big eyes down in the desert and stuff. And I have a pair of 15s or I have a pair of 10s. I'll pick up a lot of those close ones, and then everything they spot is like a mile or two away because that's where they're glassing. And I'll find myself doing that too with 15s. It's tough to glass the close stuff, and I end up looking at the far stuff more. So really being disciplined and glassing that close stuff, and having a good pair of 10 buys really does that, where you can see that close stuff good, pan your way through it, make sure there's not anything close. And also it's just like being disciplined. Like when you first sit on a vantage point, I glass the close stuff first. I just make sure there's not a deer standing there within a couple 100 yards or something that I'm going to miss. And so really being disciplined with your glass so you don't miss something.
Great tip. Moving on, a couple last ones here. We got 2 left. Jens Johnson 85. Moose hunting gear must-haves. I love this because it's something different. And you went moose hunting 2 years ago. I was moose hunting last year with Guy. You go first, Brian.
Oh, moose hunting must-haves. So, moose really stick out. So I'd say like doing the majority of glassing with like a pair of 10 buys or something like that would work. I'm just trying to think of like the necessary gear for moose. It's almost like you just have to have your head right for moose hunting more so than
Yeah.
anything else, that you're going to spend a lot of time not seeing and believing in the process, continuing to go through it. As far as specific gear for moose hunting, man, I really didn't change much of my system or my gear. To be honest, Dan, I'm kind of drawing a blank. What do you have for me
Okay.
for moose hunting?
Yeah. No, this is good because we don't get to do it very often in the lower 48. But last year hunting with Guy, one thing that I was noticing that I was like, man, I wish I would have brought them, which we just talked about, Gators and a good pair of boots, like a good pair of waterproof boots, because it seems like when we're moose hunting and we're going from vantage to vantage, or maybe we're hiking in somewhere, it's usually dewy, it's frosty, it's wet, and the vegetation's tall, like tall grass, brush, and it was wet a lot. End of September into October is the time of year where we're really changing in the fall. So we're getting rain, we're getting frost in the morning, a lot of wet conditions. And so like good pair of boots, two pair of boots, I like, one day, say we're really soaked the heck out of one pair of boots, let those dry one day and use another pair the next day. And then like good waterproof pants. Like I don't like this, swishy rain pants per se. They do have their place. If it got, wet enough, then 100% I'll wear rain pants. But like Gators are huge for those scenarios. It just seems like we're hunting, we're in Western Wyoming, but it's just wetter country and not like bogs. I mean, there's a lot of bogs, but just more precip, more dew, more clouds, more mist, just a wetter environment. And so I found that, more waterproof on the lower end actually played a big role for sure.
Oh, that is a great tip, Dan. You nailed that one. Yeah, that's exactly right. I ran into those same conditions.
And even too, like I was like, man, I should have brought my mucks. And I don't hardly ever hunt in muck boots or whatever, but when I was hunting in BC several years ago for moose, like I lived in muck boots up there. So whether you're in BC or lower 48 and you are hunting the bog country, if you're in that type of habitat, like man, muck boots are hard to beat, and that's something that don't skimp on a pair of mucks. Watch for prices, watch for deals, but you want to get a pair that fits you good, that's like not too sloppy, that if you have to do some side hilling, you're not going to like really slop around in there. Get a good pair of quality mucks or bogs or whatever the million different companies there are now that really fit your feet. Because this year on Guys Hunt, which I didn't really foresee it either, I was like, man, I could use a pair of mucks today. So that's another one.
Well, and that calling amplifier is a big one. I know hunting Alaska, you can use like a shoulder blade as well, but to make that sound of being able to scrape on a tree, and they have some calls that you can amplify your cow call or your moose grunt when you're calling for moose a bunch, like Alaskan moose, and even Shiras for that matter will call in. But having that cone that'll amplify the noise, but then you can double to use as a scraper that kind of sounds like a paddle. And like I say, some guys will use a shoulder blade or something, but I think that's like a good thing to have in your pack if you're moose hunting as well.
That's a good one. No, I didn't even think of that. And I've several times, where we're just living and dying by the call because it's so thick. So when I was in Canada, we made, the classic birch bark moose calls, in 2016 when I was up there hunting, and I brought a bunch home and I was like, oh, cool. I got to use these birch bark calls, something fun and different, and, piece of Canada or a piece of moose hunting from the past with you. So that was cool. But so an amplifier, I hadn't seen one of those. I was not aware of a moose call amplifier. Is it just like a bigger megaphone type thing, or?
Yeah, exactly. They make like a plastic, kind of looks like a grunt tube, but it's open at the end and gets bigger. And so that's what guys seem to like, to amplify that moose call as it's calling out. And a lot of them are like a plastic where they scrape against bark really well, and they sound like an antler against the tree.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool to have, and of course too, that was another thing is, we're thinking like, for scraping or just the vocalness. Moose are weird like that. Like they like to, when they're posturing, they flog the brush and you can hear their antlers. And a couple of them that we got in on that we were calling to, you can hear them down there like raking brush. It's just like what they do. And so that's something not to be overlooked either. And there were a few times I was like, man, I kind of wish I had like a wood oar, like, like a paddle
Mhm.
to use as a flogger or like a scraper, or like you said, a shoulder blade. But that's a pretty important part of moose hunting or moose calling as well, as something to make that rubbing or that scraping sound with.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%.
Good stuff. Okay, so Ty Mikowin, he's very um, active in social media with us and asking me questions all the time. Great dude. Talk to him quite a bit. Thanks for listening, buddy. This is kind of gear related. He said, how to keep mice out of your wall tent or any tent, really. You got any tips, Brian?
Cool. um, Mice are gnarly. Some of those bad years where they have mice, I've had them like infiltrate my truck. Like even if I leave my tailgate down, they get in there. Mice are an absolute pest. I think that they get to know the places where wall tents are set up and they stage there. So if you can find a place that isn't a standard wall tent setup, that'll help. But I don't have any tips for keeping them out of the wall tent other than probably if you're using a wall tent, then you're obviously using horses or you're setting up off the road. So I would get a good trap line going on the outside of the tent to keep them out of there would be my solution to it.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough back there. It's probably one of the last things that you think about if you're doing a pack in a wall tent hunt, or maybe, you're doing one off the road too, which is fine. But if you're doing one off the road, yeah, like traps, or we call them Rocky Mountain rollers is what we used when I worked for the Forest Service. It's just a 5-gallon bucket with water in there. And then you have like a wire or anything that goes across the top of the bucket with like a tin can through it, and then you put peanut butter on the tin cans, and then you have a stick that goes up, or a board that goes up to the bucket. And the idea is, the mouse runs up the stick or the board and then smells the peanut butter on the tin can, and they'll like jump out there to it, and it just rolls off and they roll into the bucket of water. And it's just one of those mouse traps that you don't have to reset, and you can put it into an old Forest Service cabin or your wall tent and walk away, and it's always set and it always catches them. So that's maybe something you're not going to bring into the backcountry, but something handy to have. I try to keep food out of my tent too. And some of these floorless shelters, you're not going to keep the mice out. That is one good thing about a 4-season tent, is you can like really seal out, mice and bugs and whatnot. But keep food out of your tent. That's the biggest thing that I've had when I've had mouse problems. Is I've had this crazy mouse chew through my backpack, chew through the bag, and got my chocolate chip cookies. You can believe that. And that really pissed me off.
Yeah, that would me too. Yeah, bringing Tupperware for your food is a big one, so you can just close it off in there, and you don't have those mice running around. Yeah, so I think that food is a big one. But yeah, it is part of wall tent camping. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a sleeping bag in a wall tent and had those buggers run over top of me. So yeah, they can be a bit gnarly, but I think Dan had a great tip with the buckets, keeping the food out, or Tupperware, and keeping a clean camp is definitely going to help.
A lot of guys around here that run wall tents or teepee style tents with horses in the backcountry, they'll bring like their blue heeler or their like little cattle dog, and they'll have that in there with them. It's mostly a bear deterrent is why they have those. But those keep mice out of your tent too. Is bring your pack dog with you. That helps. And also where you set up your tent, I feel like is another big one. Like try to stay out of the deep grass if you can. I mean, it's might be silly to say, but if you're setting up your wall tent or a floorless shelter, try to like clear the underbrush away and the grass away and get down to the dirt. I like to do that too. And the mice just don't feel as comfortable running over open dirt if they can go from like a brush pile or a bunch of grass right into your tent. It's way easier for them to maneuver about. So I will kind of clear debris and everything in those scenarios, just naturally, not thinking about mice, but that helps too. I would say it's pretty rare I have actually mouse issues in my tents over the years. Usually I'm hunting in burn areas, so it's charred earth, no underbrush anyway. and it doesn't seem like there's a ton of mice in those type of areas where I'm camping anyway. But yeah, that's a tough one. There's many ways to do it, but ultimately you can drive yourself crazy trying to keep a mouse out of your wall tent.
Yep, totally.
All right, that's what I have. Do you have any questions on your end, Brian?
Gosh, I don't. They must have followed it to your page there. We kind of put it out late today, so no, I'm not seeing any on my end. And yeah, I think we laid down a good podcast for guys about gear and upgrading their systems to make sure they're ready to go for this 2024 season. So thanks a bunch, Dan. I sure appreciate it, man.
Likewise, thanks.